So given that, I want to bring up our first panel. And I just want to briefly tell you who they are, and I'll let them introduce themselves. But this represents the triumvirate of institutions that have come together to work on this project. And that Janina Renee Baker from NILOA, Dr. Baker is joining us today. Dr. Amelia Parnell from NASPA, Michelle Sandlin from AACRAO, Laura Wankel from Northeastern University, who came to us through NASPA, and then I'm going to moderate here just a little bit. So I'm going to stop my screen share and just, I'm going to ask our panelists to unmute because I'm going to start and open up here. And we just want to talk a little bit about this 5-year journey that we've been on to try and create these records. So good morning, panelists. Thank you for being here today. I will just begin by saying I remember in 2015 that we were in a meeting, in an AACRAO meeting, I believe it might have been in Texas, and we had this room full of people who were talking about something called an extended transcript. But just I'll recap a second here. So I remember being in a room in an AACRAO meeting, I believe it was in Texas, our tech transfer meeting. And we talked about this thing called the extended transcript. And that was this term that was coming out for people who were experimenting with different things they could do in the digital space, in the world of better technology, with what had been a very static document, the academic transcript. And the first thing we realized was that was a really bad name because everyone assumed that we were trying to get rid of the academic transcript and replace it with something else. And we were so fortunate to get this grant from Lumina Foundation. We were all excited, and we did this press release about it, and Inside Higher Ed picked it up. And the very first comment at 5 a.m. or something that moment was from a faculty member at one of the a college or university somewhere saying, look what they're doing. They're trying to replace the liberal arts with basket weaving. Yeah. You know, and so we're like, oh no, you know, we've got to come up with something different. So one of the first things we did was to, you know, think of a different name than extended transcript for it so that people didn't get as confused. So listen, I'm gonna, with that, you've all met me already this morning. I want to have a chance a little bit to meet our panelists. Dr. Baker, good morning. Would you please introduce yourself and tell us a little bit about NILOA's relationship to the project?
Absolutely. Hello, everyone. Good morning or afternoon, wherever you are located. I am Janina Baker. I am at NILOA. It stands for the National Institute for Learning Outcomes Assessment. And we weren't like in the initial meeting as like a partner in that, but you brought us in and at some point, because I think that, you know, as you talked about and as Dr. Garrison Duncan talked about earlier, right, and thinking about how we are documenting all of these things and how the CLR can be used as a tool to enable. We came in and said, you know, how could you use that to connect to some type of institutionally shared learning outcomes framework? We definitely saw our role as a professional development support to many of the pilot institutions, as well as some of you that are on the call now. And we worked with many of you to help map learning and even identify some assessments of learning from both within and outside of the classroom for inclusion in a CLR. So it's been an absolute pleasure working with each of you, talking about assessment. That's what we love to talk about, and help you think about some of those questions. You know, what if transcripts were reimagined to not only provide information and credits earned, but also provide information and learning that's acquired both inside and outside the classroom? And you know, what if the transcript documented learning in a digital portable record, regardless of where the learning took place or was acquired? So that's been our role, and we have been very pleased with the results of many of you and the questions that were posed, and of course, getting the students access to such records. So thank you for having me.
Oh, great. Thank you, Janina. And, you know, as we got into this work early on and we started to dig in with institutions and really think about, you know, what they were trying to do, and we were helping them try to do that. One of the things that became really clear is they need a lot of help with learning, right? With learning outcomes and assessment and those kind of things. And we were so lucky to be able to be connected with NILOA at that point and bring you in as really important partners in this work. So thank you. Dr. Parnell, good morning.
Morning, Tom. Good morning, everybody. I'm Amelia Parnell. I work as the Vice President for Research and Policy at NASPA. And similar to AACRAO, NASPA is a national membership association with a primary focus on student affairs or student life or student services. All the things that students probably encounter outside the classroom would fall into that wheelhouse. And so I'm over here smiling. I've been smiling since we started this thing because it's just been a wonderful project. I know oftentimes people make that statement that you can't pilot your way to scale. But honestly, back in 2015, we started with a pilot of 8 schools, which then blossomed to 12 schools. And then we got generous support from Lumina to go again at a round 2 of this. And so the product is hundreds of schools now. So I kind of think you can pilot your way to scale in certain instances. And so the NASPA contribution to this has been really to kind of put forth on a headline or a banner that learning happens everywhere. And so knowing that trying to extend the transcript or have a comprehensive student record, which then turned to comprehensive learner records, it was to truly highlight that wherever a student is on a campus, they could be learning something. And so it was not so much to critique the original transcript as though it was limiting and a barrier to including out of classroom experiences, but really to transform the conversation and open up lots more opportunities for how you would document and assess that learning wherever it happens. And if it happens to happen in a club or an activity, or it happens in the classroom or undergraduate research, we would hope to be able to really help students have a resource that can tell the depth and breadth of what they can do. And so I'm looking forward to this panel. It feels a little nostalgic, kind of bittersweet, but for those of you who are not familiar with the project, I hope what you'll hear throughout today and tomorrow is the richness of a project that started in a very, very early stage as a vision and then blossomed into something that everybody can take part of. So that's why I'm smiling. Tom, thank you for the conversation. Looking forward to it.
Thank you very much. And you know, we could not have done this work without a lot of people who really helped us just dig in and work with institutions and hold their hands and, you know, get them through this, especially early on. And one of the most important people to do that has been Michelle Sandlin. And so Michelle, good morning on the West Coast today. And just, you know, share a little bit about, you know, your role in the project and your work with these schools.
Good morning, everyone. Hi from the West Coast. It's early here. It's so exciting to see so many names and faces on the screen. It really is. As Tom said, I'm with AACRAO. I've been involved from day one. Yes, I remember that email where we all freaked out, that very first email. My role in this has been a little bit more on the logistical side. I was involved from the get-go and helped organize the consultants on the AACRAO and the NASPA side when we were first working with the 12, which expanded into the 12 institutions. I worked with 3 institutions in that first phase, Elon University, University of Maryland Global Campus, and Dillard University. It was all very exciting, and we were kind of learning as we went and met with those institutions and pulling it all together. It was very fun, very exciting. Many of you know me as the lady with all the emails asking, where's my report? Yay, that's coming to an end. The million of emails from Michelle is gonna go away now. So excited to be here, excited for the next 2 days. Thanks, Tom.
But you have such a nice way of nagging people for those things.
And thank you all for thank you all very much for turning in your reports. I will share with you that every single report was read by myself and also Tom. So it was exciting every time we got a new round of reports to read how you've moved along on your CLR project.
Great, thanks, Michelle.
Mm-hmm.
And last but certainly not least, Dr. Laura Wankel, who came to us through NASPA and has been really just a fantastic, steady resource through all of this to really help us in so many different areas. Laura, would you just tell a little bit about your relationship to the project and maybe share anything you'd like to start us off?
Sure. Thank you very much, Tom. I'm thrilled to be here today. And certainly as we look back over the last 5 years, it's been quite an interesting experience at multiple levels. As Tom indicated, I was originally brought onto the project as one of the NASPA individuals. However, many of you have probably heard me introduce myself as a recovering vice president for student affairs, having served in that role, as well as a VP for enrollment management. So my sense of what is happening on our campuses is fairly comprehensive. I'm currently the interim vice chancellor for learner engagement at Northeastern University. But the work on the project has really been very focused for me on learning outcomes, learning frameworks, assessment, and collaborating with many of you as you start to try to figure out how to document, what to document. So this has been a great experience for me, and working with all of you has truly been exciting. So I look forward to today and tomorrow.
Great, thank you very much. So panelists, I want to start off with a question that goes all the way back into the origin of this record. And that is, we had this discussion at the beginning about who's this record for, right? Why are we doing this, and who is the record really for? And one of the, I guess, seminal moments in the development of this work was that we decided it was for the student. It could have been for the employer, right? It could have been for the institution, but we really decided the focus of the record was on the student. So I'd just like you to share a little bit of reflection about the student focus of the record, and maybe what are some of the benefits that you've seen that these records can have for learners. Who'd like to go first?
I'm happy to go.
Great, please do.
You know, for me, some of the challenge, and I think we've all seen it, many students are often unable to articulate what it is they've learned and how they've learned it. And we know full well that they've learned many, many things. So to me, the comprehensive learner record has become a very clear way for us to enable students, to empower them really, and taking agency over the learning that they've participated in, and be able to communicate it effectively to others, as well as connect the dots and integrate their experiences, because we all know that many people feel as though a university or college experience is just a collection of courses along the way. So I think it's really enabled us to highlight the skills and competencies and surface them so that students can actually use them as the currency they truly are for them. The other aspect, which has been really important to me, is helping them learn how to become self-directed learners. We know full well that their opportunities into the future will require considerable upskilling, and the ability to know what they need to learn and how to learn it and put it all together is a very critical lifelong skill that I think the record goes a long way in helping enable.
Great, thank you. And would someone else like to add to that or offer another perspective on it? Another benefit or thing you've seen to benefit the learner?
I think I would. So just to add to everything that Laura says, one of the early questions I got when we would be talking about this, Tom, I think you probably got it too, was how is this different from a resume? Or how is this different for something that a student would put together to showcase what they've been doing? So especially when it comes to clubs or activities or other out of classroom experiences. And I would often say it doesn't need to replace it. It could actually be a supplement to it. And that resume is submitted at some point later and you get selected for an interview. That CLR actually helps tell the how did things come together, and the student gets to showcase more of their personality. And so I think one of the leading benefits of a comprehensive learner record is that when designed by the student, with the student, and with some intentionality there, it showcases a lot more of their personality, their growth and development over time. And instead of it being a static record, it shows truly a transformation of the student's experience. And it doesn't have to wait until the completion of a credential. It could start at the very beginning. So I know I talked to a school that was very ambitious with it, and they said that they have students meet with their advisor in the first semester and say, let me show you your comprehensive learner record. And the student says it's empty. And they're like, that's right. Let's talk about how we can actually start to fill it up and start building it out. And so I imagine that a student at any point in their journey would be thinking about this record and how it can showcase what they've been doing. I also like that it doesn't have to be a 4-year experience. If a student has to unfortunately take a pause or break, this comprehensive learner record could be the difference between them being able to show what they've learned so far and actually get back to a place where they can come back to education formally. So I got a lot of reasons, but I think just showcasing the the unique nature of each student and what they would bring to any experience. The comprehensive learner record can do that really well.
I will add here that I wish I would have had something like a CLR. I think that when I think back to my first job out of college, and you're like, what did I do during those 4 years? And I did everything, but if I hadn't written it down somewhere, I would not have remembered it. So something like a CLR definitely would, I think, have showcased, and it allowed me to really reflect on everything that I'd done in those 4 years. I think one thing that we talk about at NALOA, and I'm going to share in the chat, we wrote an occasional paper on documenting learning, the comprehensive learner record, based off of Amelia and Tom's amazing work. They put together a 200+ page document of lessons learned of the pilot institutions. And so we had to boil that down a bit, as well as add in our space of what we've been learning around assessment of student learning, with in particular to the CLR. And one of the big lessons was that if the success of this particular effort of the CLR at your institution, it's contingent upon students understanding the value of why they're recording their co-curricular experiences. So I think that the focus on students is key in this. And if we talk about, and we're going to talk a little bit more tomorrow, I know, about equity in the CLR, but we talk in that paper, and I think what you'll hear even tomorrow more, is that if you're really doing this work and thinking about what a good CLR looks like, it explicitly describes learning experiences that can expose, integrate, and inform and transform students, exactly as Amelia just pointed out, and in turn places equity front and center. And no longer are the curricula, the co-curricular and beyond, hidden and only experienced by those who already knew about such experiences. So it really does work towards this anti-racist education, where power, privilege, equity is center to all students, and not just the few that knew about it. So yes, students.
Great. Yeah, thank you. I want to ask a little bit of a different question, maybe ask Michelle to start with this one. As we begin to work on these projects with institutions, I think everybody had really great but grand ideas, right, about the scope. And they wanted it to be for everybody and everything and all at once. And scope was one of the initial things that we really talked about quite a bit with institutions. Michelle, do you just want to talk a little bit about that dimension of the work? And please feel free to add anything else.
Yeah, I think early on, very early on, we were trying to get a handle on this and frame it for the 8, which became 12 institutions, to put a framework on it, to help them move through this process, because it was kind of all over the map quite a bit. There were 5 key areas that we kind of honed in on with the help of those institutions and fine-tune those. And it became a thread throughout the whole 5 years. Those 5 areas included the project scope, which was what was their CLR going to be about, and in case. A lot of schools would do just a small private with just a program. Some did badging, some did much larger university-wide. Some schools were already pretty far along on this project, like Elon, and had already done it all undergraduates. So getting a handle on the scope was probably the first biggest issue on the table for most institutions. Along with that was the learning framework, which Janina is going to talk about quite a bit. Technology, we learned very early on that this was going to be a big issue for a lot of institutions, particularly getting different systems to talk to each other. That became really prominent in phase 2, where that's the first thing that we kicked off, was looking at technology, because it became kind of a barrier for some institutions in phase 1. The design, that was actually a really fun part, where institutions were designing what this is going to look like and how to get all the pieces together. And then came in halfway through, became really important in the end, was the communication. How are you telling students about this? How are you including them? How are you including employers? Prior learning, workplace, current workplace. There was a lot having to do with internal and external communication. And that was a thread throughout the whole 5 years and continues to be. Let me stop there, Tom.
No, that's really great. And I want to go back to, you left with communication. And I was just, small world that I noticed John Bolland from Grad Intel in the UK is on the meeting today. And we had, even prior to really beginning a lot of the work, consulted with some folks over in the United Kingdom about the HERE, the Higher Education Achievement Record, and which is a diploma supplement type, and had some similarities to some ideas we were thinking of. And I was struck by one of the institutions we spoke with that said, here we built it and they didn't come. And that they got to almost completion of their degree and then found out that they had an empty report, that they hadn't filled up some of those things. So, part of that was really getting out in front of it and learning from that and understanding that you had to educate students, faculty, employers, everyone, that there was this new thing, but how to use that new thing, right, was a really important part of the success that we saw a lot of the institutions have. Great. Thanks, Michelle. And I think also a comment from Mark McConaughey at Indiana in the chat was about the fact that this is an institutionally asserted record, that it is something the institution stands behind. And Amelia, you were talking just a little bit about the difference between a resume and this record, and that certainly stands out as one of the differences between what somebody claims they have and what an institution might claim they have.
Mm-hmm. I would say for sure and it's not to paint the resume in a negative light. It certainly should be a part of one's application when they're trying to pursue employment or something else. But I think I would use maybe the University of Central Oklahoma as a good example about how to navigate that question. Because most often, if someone critiques the resume and says, well, if I say I'm certified in something, who's really going to know unless I try to, complete a skills test or assessment? UCO kind of attached this to an approach that did not necessarily claim that every single thing that a student would do outside the classroom should make it to the record. And they also asserted that depending on how much time a student spends with something, that's how it should be reflected in the record. So exposure would just be maybe me, Laura, Janina, and Tom talking about politics on the lawn. That doesn't necessarily mean that needs to be reflected on the record as having expert level understanding of the democracy. But if I actually participated in a semester long, week long experience each week for a semester, that would be different. That gets into more something comparable to integrative learning or transformative learning. And so I think that there's room for all of this in the bigger conversation. I think if we're narrowing it to a conversation of, is this better than the resume or does it replace the resume? I think you've missed the point. I think it could be supplemental to a resume, and that in combination with one, you could show the how as long as it's reflected adequately, as well as the what. What did the student learn? What did they actually get exposed to? What did they do? So I think we've moved past that though. I know early on in the project, that was often the frequent question, should we put this in the record? Should we put that in the record? That's probably gonna be still a campus level decision. But I think UCO showed us that you can actually put a lot of emphasis on the development of the student and then determine what should go into the record or not. So the question will probably still be out there, and I don't know that we'll get around it, but I'd like to think that even based on what Elon University told us, employers at some point will start to ask, may I see your comprehensive learner record along with your resume? And to me, that feels like success.
Yeah, thank you. That's great. And you brought up the A word, assessment. So let's dive into that a little bit because that has been a huge topic across the 5 years of this work. And it really began early on with really thinking about assessment of learning outside the classroom and the difference between activity and learning, and trying to make some distinctions and work with that. And Laura, you and Amelia, and I know Janina have all done some really amazing work with helping people understand assessment outside the classroom. So maybe just a few comments about that, a little reflection on how you've seen folks who deal with the difference between activity and assessed learning outside the classroom.
Well,
Laura, do you want to start?
Well, I'll just make some comments and then I'll pass it along pretty quickly. I mean, to me, a lot of when I think of colleagues in student affairs, you mentioned the word assessment and eyes glaze over. There's the panicked look of, well, how do I do this? What are you talking about? despite the fact that most student affairs practitioners will very comfortably assert that they know their students are learning as a result of the experiences they engage in through their programs. So to me, I think part of the challenge was really just making it accessible, stripping away the black box nature of it all, and really helping practitioners identify the intentionality of the work they were already doing, and trying to present opportunities and frameworks and ways of approaching it that weren't so scary. I think the frameworks that are out there and the opportunities that people have had to see so many different ways of approaching it, and understanding how to do these things in a way that just remove the scariness of it, to me, was part of the biggest challenge that we faced. So I'll turn it over to my colleagues to comment further.
I think what we noted, and we're so happy to be included, was because of that glazed over look that Laura just talked about, where we're like, let's get you excited about it, right? If you're not. We definitely noted that without a focus on assessment of student learning, CLR just doesn't work. Decisions on form and function and technology and design all hinged upon assessment. I think what you saw for those institutions that had a really robust assessment system, and those that had been very specific and actionable with their learning outcome statements, those who started with a learning framework, so that there wasn't these institutionally shared goals and endpoints to what the learning actually drives to, and then you can go back and indicate those different places where that aligned learning occurs. We found that a CLR was not a far off futuristic possibility, but instead one that could help provide documentation in the form of value to both internal and external stakeholders on the learning that's acquired, by just thinking differently about how you document what students know and can do around these different learning experiences. So assessment is essential. It is needed. It is wanted. And oftentimes it was us just talking with folks at these different institutions and saying, do you know who your assessment person is, or your centers of teaching and learning is? These are the people who can help you understand how to validate such evidence and how to help you think this through. You're not alone in this. And they actually want you to come to their office and talk. So even those just simple conversations were fun to have, and make some connections for other people so they didn't feel alone.
I would add two things to that. That I think assessment sometimes gets the bad rap because it's often attached to accountability and metrics for performance, and people perceive it as, if I do an assessment, it might unearth something that's not going well. I actually like the comments from my colleagues so far, because this instance, assessment is used to really showcase the benefits and the value. It's used to be something that would be positive, and the more assessment we can do to get precise with learning outcomes, the better we can serve the student, and they can actually tell their story better. So I actually like to put a positive angle on that. The other is to highlight the transformation of the name comprehensive learner record, the idea that we are asserting that learning is the goal and that's happening. And it makes it a more broad conversation, that by saying student, sometimes people would have the perception that it's the traditionally aged student between the ages of 18 and 24. But by saying learner, it's more open to anyone at any point in their journey. And so to be able to assess that and pull out those learning outcomes for any student, wherever they are in the journey, I think is a positive thing.
Yeah, thanks, Amelia. And I think too, even reflecting back, just the way that learning outcomes have they've gotten new meaning and new preeminence in this, because rather than just being something that accreditors made us do and we check the box and say, okay, we did learning outcomes, now on with the teaching and on with the stuff we were doing, we're really tying these things together in a really meaningful way. And we're asking faculty to really put more emphasis on learning outcomes and competencies as currency in something that will be important and will be shared and will be reflected in these records. I think that's been something that's been really interesting to see happen along the way. We've just got a couple minutes here. I'm gonna ask Michelle to start with this last one. One of the biggest things, of course, that happened in the last 5 years was COVID. And we just, saw so many things in higher education get upended in the midst of COVID. But what were some of the reflections as you saw COVID really throw everybody off the rails? What were some of the things that you saw happen with that, Michelle?
Let me speak from when COVID happened, things kind of went in a halt and a standstill for quite a few months there. As many of you are my pen pals over the being involved in the CLR process, I got tons of emails about that you needed to stall. You were so busy trying to figure out how you were going to make sure you were continuing to have classes and communicate with students and have them involved. So I know a lot of institutions kind of went in a stalled pattern. For most of you that as you got your got into the whole virtual campus type of thing, things started to restart in the fall. Everybody started to kind of engage back in the fall and get started again. But I think it really delayed quite a few schools and put everybody back quite a bit moving forward. That's why we moved back to Showcase, because this Showcase was originally supposed to happen back in August. I think we were going to be in Indianapolis, which kind of put the whole thing at a halt there. So I think it delayed, but some schools, it still has delayed them and they still haven't been able to restart. But I think that's okay based on what's going on in the world. But that was the biggest thing. I can't think of any school that totally walked away from this though. Everybody was still on board, still committed to this, still saw the value, particularly in what they could provide to their students. So I think that was a big part of it.
Yeah. Any other thoughts about COVID's impact on the project?
Well, I don't know if it would be so specific to the project entirely, but I do think COVID has accelerated the window of opportunity for transformative behaviors at our institutions. And certainly the project and what it is attempting to accomplish would fit into that space. So I imagine conversations have shifted somewhat more quickly, and the opportunity to pilot and try some new things was very much encouraged as with the disruption brought on by COVID.
Yeah.
And I would add that it is just in the middle of a global pandemic, and as we are still questioning about the value and purpose of higher education, that the CLR is, if you're able to get to a space of where you're able to show what your students know and can do in all of these various ways. I mean, we were able to really start to speak to some of those questions being asked of us that we might not have been able to before. And so I do, especially those face-to-face experiences and how that's been kind of taken away because of the pandemic. Now let's think about what those experiences, what do they really mean? What's their value on our campuses? So thinking about all of those questions, I think in relation to that has provided an opportunity for us, I think in a large space for CLR to take over and start to help with that conversation, and then also provide evidence of what that looks like.
Great, wonderful. And I think of the word resilience, that we've seen amazing resilience from our institutions that have bounced back. I think to Michelle's initial point that institutions really just had to completely devote themselves to not only operating everything online, right, where they couldn't even go into an office, but also instruction, and then even the instructional mode changing. Right? Oh, we're going to be in person. No, we're going to be remote. No, we're going to be in person somewhat. No, we're so they went through all that, and especially great sympathy for our student affairs folks trying to figure out community in a virtual space, and our registrars trying to figure out all those course schedules and timings. It's amazing the progress they made. I just thank you, panelists. This has been a great discussion. It's been a great 5 years. I mean, just an amazing process to work with you and get to know all of you a little bit better through this process, but also the collaboration between our organizations has been amazing. And just, I've learned so much by collaborating with NILOA and NASPA about the work that they do, and it's really enriched my own practice. And so thank you so much for that.